Hello and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pierce. This is a news update for the 31st of January 2023. Sometimes I look at what's gone on and think, oh, there's not a lot to report on, so I'm going to join this in as I used to do with my frontline update. And then I suddenly find there is lots to talk about, so here goes. Where should we start? Let's go to our normal starting place of the Ukraine figures for the daily losses for the Russians. Caveat, accuracy, caveat, propaganda. Russians don't produce the same sort of figures. Anyway, liquidated personnel, 850. So there is an uptick. There's an uptick there, but a downtick possibly with other equipment. 9 APCs, that's fairly decent. 1 artillery system, 1 MLRS. 4 UAVs, so 4 drones, 7 vehicles and fuel tanks, and 1 piece of special equipment. We heard yesterday that 2 radars were hit. Does that translate to 1 piece of special equipment? I don't know if they were associated with each other or whatever, or whether that's something completely different. So there you go. Those are the figures. I think we've seen such high figures on the tanks and APCs. I mean, the APCs, 9 APCs is still something, that, they had to drop back down soon. And I've just seen some footage of, in fact, I guess I'll show it to you now. It's not one that I would usually show in the news section, but it gives you some indication as to where these figures come from. So this is a bit of footage, and I think it's from Vuhledar. I'm not sure, but if you just count up the number of vehicles here, it is absolutely staggering. And all those sort of burning areas there are ex-vehicles, former vehicles, pining for the fjords, and here more and more and more. So when you have days where there are 22 APCs listed, I mean, just in that one shot, there is 7 APCs. That's 7 APCs in one single frame of that. Okay, there's an 8th one just there, and then a 9th one just around the corner. So basically, in one shot, you've got about 10 APCs. Just absolutely insane. So this kind of footage then gives you an indication you got more over here. It just gives you an indication that in some place, when you see figures of 22 APCs lost, again another few there, you realise that there's a graveyard of vehicles. And as I say, I think it's Vuhledar, not 100% sure. So you start doubting these figures. You think 22 APCs. The other day there were 27 APCs, and then a few days later that kind of footage comes out. You're like, okay, yeah, I'm with you now. I understand that is a realistic number, and actually we can sort of verify some of these numbers with footage. Stoltenberg asked South Korea to supply weapons to Ukraine. He asked Korea to reconsider the policy of no military aid to countries at war, so a bit like Switzerland, and start supplying arms and ammo. If we don't want autocracy and tyranny to win, then they need weapons. That's the reality. I showed you part of a video and signposted it to you about how South Korea are the up-and-coming arms exporter. They do things like Poland buys the first bunch of K2 tanks off them, and then after they've bought so many, they are allowed to build them themselves in Poland. Now that's quite a neat business model, because it means that Poland will feel they can stimulate their own economy, that money isn't just going to South Korea, that they're going to be manufacturing these things, but it will be under license. That's a way of getting around, in Britain, we're wondering what to do with our tanks next. So Challenger 3 upgrade is still using a chassis that's, pretty old. Do we go abroad and say, okay, we'll have these tanks rather than build our own? What does that say about our own arms industry? Or do we use that model, which is, okay, go to South Korea and say, yeah, we'll buy a bunch of these and then we'll build these back in Britain? And it's kind of that hybrid model of supporting your own industry to an extent, whilst also buying, a tank from someone else, another country, which is also a really reasonably priced tank. I mean, the South Korean stuff, because they make it at such huge scale, they can afford to make them fairly reasonably. They are consistently at war, if you like, or on tenterhooks with North Korea. So there's a massive demand for their military gear. Anyway, There you go. This is news of a pilot. A prominent 24-year-old pilot was killed on a combat mission in Donbass. He was shot down by a Russian pilot. He had flown 141 sorties. I mean, this is these are the official figures released. That was apparently he took out 70 Russian armored vehicles, 80 cars, 30 fuel tanks, and killed about 600 Russian soldiers. These are, of course, fairly guesstimate numbers, but he's quite a well thought of pilot. Anyway, he was shot down by uh, a Russian plane, and he wanted to not hit a residential. He not hit a town, Shabelkivka in Donetsk, and as a result, he kind of veered his plane off. Then the plane was too low, and I think he was either unable to eject or the eject went wrong or something. But basically, the idea is he died as a result of trying to save his plane from going into that town. And yeah, that's a big loss. When I talk about the losses of planes on figures like these, so when you get planes or helicopters here, the bigger loss is in terms of the pilots that take so long to train. And you can replace a plane, particularly Russia can replace planes relatively easily, and helicopters, they've got a larger stock of them, but do they have the stock of pilots? Arguably not. Sticking to planes and jets, US President Biden has announced, after discussions with allies and defense officials, they have decided F-16 combat aircraft will not be transferred to Ukraine. So he was asked in public and he said no. But as this person says, it's no doesn't necessarily mean no outright. It means, it depends on the question and what the thinking is at the time. So my thought is that there'll be a lot of talk about planes going forward. If it's not the F-16, it could be something else. I don't know that it doesn't mean that it means that F-16s are off the table forever. We heard this previously about main battle tanks. No, 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 yes. It could be that, again, I don't know whether they have been trained. The pilots have been being trained in the US on, say, F-16s for the last 10 months, as some people are claiming. If that's the case, then it's kind of no at the moment until we get everything just right, and then it'll be a yes, and we've already trained the pilots, and the planes are on the way type thing. But that might not be the case at all. So it's mere speculation. Anyway, that is a shame. A lot of people are saying this is a real shame, saying no to F-16s. Some people saying things like this. Countries that the US have supplied F-16 fighter jets to: Morocco, Jordan, Taiwan, Israel, Greece, Indonesia, Bahrain, UAE, Turkey, Oman, Portugal, Chile, Poland, Egypt, Pakistan, Venezuela, Thailand, Iraq, and 8 other countries. But Ukraine, no. So there you go. As this person says, come on, Ukraine already has pilots training for F-16, and I'm sure NATO alliance has already worked out the entire play on this. They'll pretend to be thoughtful and wise for the citizens before handing them over. If they just send them immediately, it seems irrational. And as Ukraine Battlemap says, training started with HIMARS, Abrams, M777, NASAMS, and Patriots after USA announced it, not before. So this is the counter argument. And there is no evidence that Ukrainian pilots are being trained on F-16s in the USA. Ukraine would not be asking for F-16s if Ukrainian pilots were training on them now. So this is the information space is kind of like full of stuff like this. Yeah, but they are. No, but they're not. Yeah, but they are. No, but they're not. And you have, meanwhile, countries like Netherlands saying, well, we're prepared to send them if others do. The Poland said this yesterday. This is Rutte saying there are no deliveries and no requests either. So he's not had any formal requests for them. So there are no deliveries going on. But the idea is if he is hit with a request, he'll certainly consider it, especially if other countries are willing to give them as well. So Minister Rutte said in a joint press conference with French President Macron, the Netherlands said it is open to supply once a formal request comes. Like Macron, Rutte believes that there are no taboos in supporting Ukraine to win the war with Russia. Quote, but it would really be a very big next step if it comes to that, Rutte said about supplying fighter jets. It's out there. Surely it's going to happen at some point. I don't see why it wouldn't. If people are genuinely not feeling the threat of the nuclear holocaust that was the previous worry about escalating in terms of equipment. Tim White here says Ukraine so far has drawn a blank on getting F-16 fighter jets or equivalent. Poland, Netherlands have said they are not against, but only in an alliance. USA, Germany, and UK have said no. Today, Alexei Reznikov, who is the Ukrainian defense minister, will meet France's president and defense minister, and we hope for good news. So, yeah, we'll see what happens with regard to jets. UK has said Challenger tanks will arrive at the front line in Ukraine by the summer or May of this year. So May is still in spring, but it looks like it's going to be late spring, probably not in time for the what was perceived to be the planned time for the counteroffensives. British Defence Minister Ben Wallace has said. So they are training. They arrived, was it yesterday? I showed you pictures of the tankers arriving, as in the people training to be crew on tanks, not big boats full of oil. So tankers arrived in Britain, and they are starting their training already. In fact, they're training on operational stuff and strategy, I think, before they do combat operations. So actually, Ben Wallace has kind of announced how their training is going to go. I think it's Ben Wallace. Talking about equipment like that, photos provided by US Transportation Command. It looks like Ukraine. So I think these are the ones planned or being delivered to Ukraine. It looks like Ukraine is receiving the M2A2 ODS-SA Bradley fighting vehicle. For those kind of geeks interested in this, I mean, this is the upgraded, this kind of stuff. This is the upgraded version. It has upgraded armor protection and greater combat capabilities, and is easier to operate and maintain than former variants. Here's a little sidebar for you. I was reading somewhere that the UK, this might be in the Challenger tanks actually, or might be in other vehicles. The UK recognised that they were getting, they had to appeal to young people coming into the armed forces, but B, for ergonomics and practical reasons. So they started introducing controls that are a bit like PlayStation, Xbox controls for their vehicles, for aspects of their vehicles. I don't know exactly why I'm probably bastardizing this, but the idea is that the people operating them will already be really used to operating controls like that, rather than bespoke tank or whatever it is, IFV controls that they have to relearn. It's not intuitive. They've designed them to be able to be used more easily by people who are used to gaming, which is like all of society nowadays. So it's moving with the times, whilst also looking at it, by also saying actually it's also practically pretty useful to have controls like this as well. Anyway, you can go and fact check that, because that is just me remembering an article I've read. Russian company Force, and I've heard this elsewhere with bigger numbers, but it might have been rubles, and translating that to dollars does this. But I don't know whether this Russian company has added their rewards to what has already been offered by maybe the Russian government or something. But the Russian company Force is offering cash rewards to Russian soldiers who destroy Abrams and Leopard tanks. 72,000 for the first tank and 7,200 for each next one. None have been delivered yet. $216,000 will be paid for a downed F-15 or F-16 fighter jet, which allies haven't even yet agreed. In fact, I think there was like something like millions of dollars being offered, or millions of some currency being offered for a captured Abrams or Leopard tank. So it's out there, and I wonder whether that would actually affect on the battlefield thought. Like if commanders and soldiers know they're up against these tanks, and in the back of their mind is like, I could literally become like a millionaire or something, or I'd be sorted for the rest of my life if I capture one of these tanks. Like whether that change your tactics on the battlefield, and whether that's a good or a bad thing. I don't know. France and Australia. So there's been this whole issue between France and Australia, the AUKUS thing. I don't know if you guys are aware, but there's a massive argument about submarines. I think Australia decided not to buy French submarines, and it was all highly controversial because it had all been planned and agreed upon. And so there's been this tension between the two nations. Anyway, they've got together and said they're going to provide Ukraine, because Australia makes shells, so they've been ramping up their production. But France and Australia will manufacture and supply 155mm shells to the Ukrainian armed forces, says the French Defense Minister Sébastien Lecornu, and Australian Minister of Defence Richard Marles. So that's good news. The artillery shells are much in demand, as you can imagine. Denmark has confirmed it's handing over all its 19 Caesar howitzers. This is absolutely phenomenal. And this goes back to what I was saying the other week, I think, which is why is Britain handing over 14 challengers? Like, if we're attacked, things are really bad at that stage if someone actually lands on UK soil. Now, I know we need to retain capability to fight in other theatres. It's like America, they always have to be, they've got a massive defence. They spend gazillions on defence every year. But their thought is that we need to be able to operate on multiple fronts at the same time, multiple theatres of war at the same time. So it's not just about thinking about Ukraine and nothing else. It's like Ukraine, Taiwan, Middle East, here, there. We need enough stuff to be able to cope with all that. But with Denmark and the UK and Europe and NATO, and taking into account all of these things and safety in numbers, that I don't see why you just don't go, right, this is the biggest threat we have, and it's probably going to be the only immediate threat to us here, as far as needing to use tanks and self-propelled guns, that we are going to have. So therefore, let's throw everything at Ukraine and we can all defeat this common enemy. So give 79 challengers that aren't going to be upgraded to the Challenger 3, give those challengers to Ukraine, all of them. And that will also help with the logistics train behind. Here, Denmark have done this, which is like, we're realistically not going to be invaded by anyone on land, and we're not going to send these Caesars anywhere else. We've done a bit of an analysis, and yet Taiwan's a bit of a problem, but I don't think Danish Caesars are going to end up there. So therefore, send them all to Ukraine. Here you go. This is why I keep. And by the way, I have written an article that I'd like to point you towards. I forgot to tell anyone, and I wrote it about 3 days ago. So the article on OnlySky, yes, it is a proxy war, and it's one we must win. And this article basically talks about the fact that we are involved in a proxy war, and we're providing everything apart from soldiers on the front line, and therefore, by any kind of definition of proxy war, I'd say it is one. I mean, it's semantics, right? Who really cares whether we are or not? What difference does it make? Just labeling it. But I think we are in a proxy war, and here's a great example: is Denmark are like, well, they are fighting this war for us. These guys are our biggest threat. We want to eliminate them as a threat. So here are all our Caesar self-propelled guns. We're not going to need them anywhere else. You have them all. You're doing the fighting for us. There you go. And I would advocate doing that with, well, pretty much everything. Like we're at the point where, so I could understand like bleeding Russia as much as possible, but now we're at a point where, like, let's get this over and done with. Let's stop as many people dying as possible by actually bringing this thing to an end sooner, which is giving, it sounds counterintuitive, giving Ukraine as many weapons as possible will mean the war is over sooner. Give them the capability to win this thing and win it quickly. Here you go. Everything. So that's my opinion. Ukraine moves up in a global corruption rating. So the CPI, which is Corruption Perceptions Index, which I've shown to you a bunch of times, Ukraine is, doing pretty badly. It's like 122nd place or something. But this year it's earned 33 points out of 100 in the Transparency International's CPI for 2022. So it's 1 point higher than the year before. So moving in the right direction. Although it scores low, war-torn Ukraine is one of the few significant improvers on the CPI, having gained 8 points since 2013. Transparency International said. Russia has 28 points, which is 1 point less than last year. So it's gone down to 137th, Russia. And Ukraine, I think, was at 122nd, has now moved to 116th. It's moving in the right direction. Russia's moving in the wrong direction. Russia is more corrupt than Ukraine, as according to these metrics, or this metric. So if you're pro Russia, how do you deal with that kind of information? And if you keep attacking Ukraine for being corrupt, at least it's moving in the right direction. Yes, it has huge problems, but it is moving in the right direction. Iran, talking about corruption, I mean, Iran and Russia merged banking systems and launched their own payment system. You've got to wonder whether you're on the right side of your best mates are Iran and North Korea. I mean, honestly, honestly, if you're pro-Russian, just I want you to answer this. If your best mates are Iran and North Korea, are you on the right side? How can you justify being on the right side? You got King Jong Un shooting his whoever with an anti-aircraft gun, like as a way of dealing with justice. Are you on the right side? Jesus wept. Iran and Russia merged the banking system. They launched their own payment system after the SWIFT ban. The new system will connect around 700 Russian banks. Wow, that's a lot of banks. And 106, that's a lot of nuts. 700 Russian banks and 106 foreign banks with 13 other countries. Russia plans using it to increase trade volume with Iran to $10 billion a year. Yeah, good luck with that. But this is obviously I don't mean to be flippant. This is a threat, and one would struggle to see how this can be hugely successful compared to Swift, but it is obviously a challenge to the way that sanctions have been arranged. And then finally, is it? Yeah. Well, so finally, this guy from Wagner who escaped into Norway, which I'm sure that a film could be made of that. I mean, so a former Wagner mercenary says the brutality he witnessed in Ukraine ultimately pushed him to defect. The 26-year-old who says he previously served in the Russian military joined Wagner as a volunteer. So he crossed the Ukraine less than 10 days after signing his contract in July 2021. Um, and he's served in Bakhmut and so on and so forth. Anyway, his escape was pretty amazing. I think, he escaped 10 different, where is it? Yeah, Medvedev spoke to CNN from Oslo after crossing its border in a daring defection that he says saw him evade arrest at least 10 times and dodge bullets from Russian forces and I think dogs. I think he was chased by dogs near the border. He crossed into Norway over an icy lake using white camouflage to blend in. Now, what you have to remember here is this guy was a volunteer. We talked about this yesterday with regard to revanchism and Russians escaping from mobilization. Doesn't necessarily mean they are pro-West. Doesn't necessarily mean they're against the war in Ukraine. It means that they don't want to be in uh, mobilized. They don't want to be mobilized and sent to the front lines and die. Right here, this guy was a volunteer that went voluntarily to fight for Wagner against Ukraine. Yet it looks like his ideas were changed with what he saw. So Wagner fighters are often sent into battle with little direction, which goes against actually what's a lot of the claims about Wagner, which is they're using IR systems and very high-tech drones, and they're able to know exactly where everyone is at any given time, and then move little squads of people. But maybe this is like in the best case scenario, but actually during times of having waves and waves of convicts, that kind of went by the wayside, possibly. I don't know. I'm just trying to interpret two bits of data. So he says the company's treatment of reluctant recruits was ruthless. He told Anderson Cooper from Norway's Oslo, where he's seeking asylum after crossing the country's Arctic border from Russia. Wagner lacked a tactical strategy with troops coming up with plans on the fly, he said. Quote, there were no real tactics at all. We just got orders about the position of the adversary. There were no definite orders about how we should behave. We just planned how we should go about it step by step. Who would open fire, what kind of shifts we would have, how it would turn out. That was our problem, he said. Medvedev spoke to CNN from Oslo. Yep. He says, oh, yeah, no, I read that bit. So he started off with 10 men under his command, a number that grew once prisoners were allowed to join. There were more dead bodies and more people coming in. In the end, I had a lot of people under my command, he said. I couldn't count how many. They were in constant circulation. Dead bodies, more prisoners, and more bodies, and more prisoners. Advocacy groups say prisoners who enlisted were told their families would receive a payout of 5 million rubles, $71,000, if they died in the war. But in reality, nobody wanted to pay that kind of money, Medvedev said. He alleged that many Russians who died fighting in Ukraine were just declared missing. This is a claim that we've seen a number of times, with a lot of people saying that they haven't been paid, and it's basically the Wagner or the Russian regular forces are basically lying and saying that they're relatives are just missing. Well, of course, if you're not going to pick up the bodies from the battlefield, then yeah, they're technically, many of them will be missing. But you know where they are. They're over there and they're dead, but you just don't want to pick them up for a bunch of reasons. partly because you don't want to pay out for them, but also quite often we've seen people. I saw some footage yesterday of groups of people being attacked by javelins, but shot by like anti-tank guided missiles, and these guys were helping injured soldiers, and there was a groups of them, or maybe one injured soldier, and the rest were walking, and then bang, they're all taken out. So in other words, it can be dangerous to go and pick up soldiers as well. When asked if he fears a fate meted on other Wagner defector Yevgeny Nuzhin, this is a guy that was murdered on camera with a sledgehammer. He said that death emboldened him to leave. I would just say it made me bolder, more determined to leave, he said. So when you've seen people executed in front of recruits, then, you have second thoughts about what you're doing, I guess. So he says, sooner or later, the propaganda in Russia will stop working, the people will rise up, and all our leaders will be up for grabs, and a new leader will emerge. Well, that's the hope, isn't it? Canada has expressed, along with the US, that its war, at least its willingness to recognise the Wagner PMC as a terrorist organisation. Anyway, that's news for today. We'll get on with the frontline update. Hope that's of some use, some interest. Please like, subscribe, and share, and check out my my article, which will be linked in the description below. Yes, it is a proxy war, and it's one we must win, on OnlySky. Anyway, till the pit. Speak later.